Hello, welcome to the 7th episode of the Employee to Boss podcast. I'm your host, Hayleigh Hayhurst, and today I want to share how you can actually start your podcast. I'm a podcast producer and strategist, and I help my clients, entrepreneurs, and business owners increase their profits and visibility through having a podcast that works for them and their business. It's a brand new year, 2022, and a lot of us have a goal to actually launch a podcast. But when you look on Google and, search how to start a podcast, there are so many answers that pop up, and it's pretty overwhelming. So in this episode, I really want to lay out the actual things that you need to do to start a podcast that I have done, my clients have done, and I've coached people how to do it step by step. To preface this, I help people launch their podcast. So if this is something that you actually want to accomplish in 2022, send me a DM on Instagram at Espresso Podcast Production, or on Facebook. You can find me at my name, Hayleigh Hayhurst, because I can do this for you. Or I have a course that's launching very, very soon that shows you step by step how to start a podcast in a short amount of time. Honestly, you can start a podcast within 7 days. You can do a podcast even shorter than that. You can launch way faster if you have help, because research is just overwhelming, and I know that. So I want to share my favorite tips and honestly the easiest tips on how to launch a podcast in 2022. You can find the downloadable version of this in the show notes, and it's a checklist of actually how to launch. But I want to give you some more details and actually walk you through the process. There are 3 main steps that you need to take to start a podcast. And just to simplify it, the first step is record, the second step is plan, and the third step is execute. Now notice that record is the first thing that I want you to do. This does not have to be an episode that people actually listen to. The way that we write and the way that we speak are different. So if you plan on starting a podcast and you plan on scripting it all out, it's really not going to sound authentic. And so the first thing I want you to do is open voice memo on your phone and just start talking. Talk about why you want a podcast, what you want to accomplish with a podcast, who you want to speak to, who your listeners are, and go deep into the topics that you want to address, and then listen back to it and see, is this something that you actually want to do? Podcasts are great for, honestly, every industry, but it has to be something that you can do consistently. Consistency can mean a million different things. It could be 1 podcast a month, 1 podcast a week, but you need to get on a schedule. And so the reason I want you to listen to yourself and record first is because you need to be confident with what you're talking about, and it's going to be different than writing what you're talking about. The next step is to plan it out. Now, this is where my podcast checklist comes into play. You can download this in the show notes. The things you need to do is decide on a topic, which you recording your voice and talking about it should be really, really helpful. The next step is setting up all the tech. So buying the microphone, figuring out what you're going to record on, buying the ring light, buying the webcam if you want a video podcast. All of those things are going to be the tech portion. Also, if you want to have guests, planning out what type of guests you want, how you're going to reach out to your guests, how you're going to schedule your guests, because it's 2022. We're not using paper calendars anymore. You need an online scheduler. So setting that all up, it does not take long, but this is the part that holds a lot of people back because it is so detailed. It's really detailed. You don't need to start off with the fancy microphone. You don't need to start off with all of fancy tech. Honestly, if you just need to get started and the only thing you have are AirPods or something similar, I hate to say it as a podcast producer, but just do it because you can upgrade later. The most important thing that I want to preach during this, and I want you to really absorb, is get started. Do whatever it takes to actually just get started. The next step in setting up is deciding on your podcast name, deciding on your podcast cover art. This is where a lot of people get stuck too with their branding. I'll talk about this in another episode, but you can find a lot of my information on setting up your podcast in a beautiful way that you love and your listeners love. You can find that on my Instagram. I share tips every single week on this. To go along with what you need to do before you actually release your podcast is you need to create a landing page for your podcast to put all of your episodes and more information about yourself. If this is confusing to you, send me a DM. You can also just, tell people to go look at your Instagram and link it there. For examples of a landing page, you can look at my website, espressopodcastproduction.com/podcast. I created my website with Wix, and it was so easy. I did it in the back of a coffee shop in one afternoon, and honestly, I've been adding to it ever since. So just create the shell, and then you can go into detail later on. The next step is to choose your podcast hosting platform. Personally, I use Spreaker. I'll put that in the show notes, but there are so many podcast platforms out there, hosting platforms, that it really does not matter what you choose. You can do a free one like Anchor. You can do a, expensive one like Captivate. I like Spreaker, but honestly, and listen to me here, it does not matter what you choose. Because as long as your episode is up on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, that's all that matters. Now, the next step, this is the fun part, is actually recording. So you're going to want to record 3 episodes to release on your launch day. This gives people a way to binge your content and get to know you. So this is about yourself. You need a trailer. You have a first episode, and there you go. You have 3 episodes right there. You can record your episodes ahead of time, and I really recommend at least being 2 weeks in advance. Before I launched my podcast, I probably recorded 14 or 15 episodes. That way, I had a lot of content to fall back on, especially if a guest doesn't show up. So please, 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 please do not leave your podcast until the last minute. I do a lot of editing for my clients, and to work with me, it's actually a requirement that you need to be 2 weeks in advance of your content. I am not about editing last minute. I want everything to sound amazing and professional and not rushed. And so I want the same for you. Record your episodes at least 2 weeks in advance if you can. Of course, there's some industries like news, politics, sports that it's pretty timely and you can't record too far in advance. But don't leave it till the last minute, even if it is a very timely podcast. The next step is to edit your episodes. I use Adobe Audition. I think it's absolutely perfect. You are able to do every single thing that you need to do, such as rendering, such as mixing down your audio, creating your intro and outro, adding music. That's why I love Adobe Audition. But it is a paid platform. I use it for my business, so I also have all of the Adobe suite. But if you're looking for something free, you can look into Audacity. That's a really good one that a lot of people use. But if you're looking to outsource your audio, this may be a controversial opinion, but when you're looking to hire a podcast editor, ask what they use, because if they're using a free service, it's probably not going to be the best quality of audio. So the next step is to schedule your episodes and write your show notes. You can look at my show notes for an example of what I do, and then also look at your favorite podcasts to figure out what style of show notes work for you and your interest. Some people write the shortest show notes, and that's fine. Some people, like me, write pretty detailed show notes. I want people to be able to see what the episode is about before they commit their time to it. The most important thing I want to stress here is add your links to either your Instagram, Facebook, or wherever you want your audience to connect with you, so they actually have the links right there and can connect with you immediately. So once you have your episodes edited and scheduled and you have your show notes, you need to submit your episodes to the streaming platforms such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all of those. This could take up to 2 weeks to be approved. For me, it was pretty fast, but for some of my clients, it has actually taken the full 2 weeks to show up on Apple Podcasts. This is something to be conscious of if you actually have a set launch date. Be at least 2 weeks prepared and submitted before you actually announce it. That way, you don't announce a podcast that's not playing yet. And you'll submit your podcast to the RSS feed through your hosting platform, like Spreaker. The next step is if you want to set up a YouTube channel. This is a great way to engage with your listeners more, for them to see more about you, your personality. I have a YouTube channel where I cut down my episodes from about 30 minutes, an hour, to about 10-minute highlights where they can see myself, they can see my guest, and just really connect with me more. I like this because I have a big personality and I want that to be shown through video. And so that is why I decided to set up a YouTube channel. So this is a lot of information, but the main thing I really need you to remember is record, plan, and execute. If you have any questions about this, send me an email, hello@Espresso Podcast Production, or send me a DM on Instagram @Espresso Podcast Production, or on Facebook, you can find me at Hayleigh Hayhurst, HayleigH, HayHurst. I know I have a crazy spelling for my name. Thanks, Mom. And so, like I mentioned, I help people do this all the time. If you're looking for easy, if you're looking for simple, you can definitely hire someone like me to do this for you. If you're looking for something more DIY, but still very detailed and all the information you need, join my course waitlist. I'll put that link below as well in the show notes. Or if you have time and you want to figure it all out yourself, listen to this episode a couple times, Google how to start a podcast, and just don't get overwhelmed. That's the main part. It's not hard. You just need to know all the steps. And so do not get overwhelmed. You will figure it out. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I am so excited to connect with each and every one of you. Join me back next week for another episode with an amazing guest. Thank you for listening to the Employee to Boss podcast. If you made it to the end of this episode, I hope that you implement the actionable steps from this week's experts so you can get started with your business today. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the Employee to Boss podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps more than you could ever imagine. Remember, a little progress each day leads to big results. We come out with a new episode every Tuesday. To access our show notes, transcripts, and courses, please check out espressopodcastproduction.com.